Welcome to Full Press, a media criticism podcast from The Hub, where listeners and viewers can escape the echo chambers of the mainstream media for a precious 40 minutes every 2 weeks on Thursday. As always, I am joined by my lovely co-host, Tara Henley, and Peter Menzies over in Calgary. How are you guys doing today?
Excellent, thank you.
Very well, thanks.
Good. I'm good that we got a clean bill of health halfway through this campaign. If you can believe it, we're through the halfway mark already. Okay, so here's what we're going to touch on today. Our three issues. Journalists complaining about their mistreatment on the campaign trail. Does the public care, or is it crickets? Number two, biological clocks are ticking across Canada. Do you hear that? Canada's Carney's new big shiny plan for the CBC is our third topic. What's the money that goes into that? What has the reaction been? Does Poilievre still plan to axe the entire English arm of our public broadcaster? So let's start with block one here, complaints from the press box. There was a Globe and Mail article that came out a few days ago with the headline, How the Conservative and Liberal Federal Election Campaigns Are Treating the Media. And it went through all the various types of treatment, which I can get to into a sec. But I just want to get off the top. Peter, what was your view when that article hit the tiny screen of your phone?
Well, my view was that journalists were good at counting, that they were able to figure out that Carney had taken 100 questions and Poilievre had taken less than half of that. And my big question, the one that should not be asked of all reporters when they come up with a story, is so what? I mean, what difference does it make? Does it make a difference? Perhaps it does, perhaps it doesn't. But how? And what were the questions? I mean, if the questions are the Toronto Sun asking Poilievre, why are you so awesome, right? And the Toronto Star asking Carney, how did you ever get to be so smart? Then how is the public served by that? We need to know what the questions are and the context of the questions, not just counting. That makes no sense at all to me.
For the mathematicians that listen to the Full Press, here's the count. And these numbers were sent by the Liberal campaign. The Globe and Mail says they got to the same tally. I love the Liberal campaign obviously wanting to boast how much questions they answer. The answers might be a whole other story. Mr. Carney had been asked 140 questions from media since the election was called to Mr. Poilievre's 48. Apparently, Poilievre... each reporter is permitted to ask one question with no follow-up, 4 total, 2 going to local media. We've talked about in previous podcasts the fact that he's trying to bring in more local media on the campaign trail while barring the parliamentary press gallery from being inside his plane or bus. And Carney, they get 15 minutes. I think it's as many questions as they can ask. They get one question with a follow-up. What do you think of that tally, Tara? Do the numbers matter at all?
Well, I've said this before, I'll say it again. I'm always going to argue for more access for the press, but I don't know that this is a pressing issue in election 2025, and I don't know that the public particularly cares. I mean, yes, we definitely want access for our journalists, for sure, but I think Peter's point is very well taken, and I think the answers to the questions matter just as much as the statistics do. Are we getting actual answers from these candidates on what they're going to do if they get elected? But also, I just think there's a kind of element of it of just being the journalists becoming too much the story themselves. We saw that on Twitter X just today. Judy Trin tweeting from Sault Ste. Marie from a Conservative announcement there and complaining that the press were kind of boxed into a very small area. And I just find that just a little bit too much. I don't think the public particularly cares. I don't think it's our job to make ourselves the story. And if we don't get access to the candidates, there's also many, many ways to continue reporting on them. And we should take advantage of those ways and be a little industrious.
I like at the end of the Globe story, they interview an expert who says, I doubt that a candidate's reluctance to engage with the media will be an issue for many voters, basically hitting on that point. Let me play devil's advocate, Peter. So you hear from journalists around the campaign trail. They say that Mr. Poilievre's focus on local media, elevating influencers at his rally has come at the expense of his campaign, that you're not getting a good sense of continuity as it relates to the messages he's hitting on. Others might say he looks weak when he boxes reporters in with his fencing. They point to, apparently in the Globe article, tensions flared in St. John's. There was a scuffle between reporters trying to yell questions at Poilievre and one of his media flack people stepping in. They talk about him nudging journalists towards certain questions as it relates to the ones they're asking. Does this have a negative effect on his campaign, do you think?
I don't think so. I think it's a little bit of a, I don't want to use too strong a word, but it's they're leveraging their position as media to kind of say, unless you're really nice to us and you give us the sort of leeway we want, you are going to fail in politics, right? Which is really not something journalists should be getting into. They should be doing the very best job they can to ask as many questions as they can and to report as truthfully as they can on the events of the day, not sort of hinting that, hey, if you would just take more questions from us, you could probably become prime minister, because the people who treat us well are the ones who become prime minister.
The ones that come into our editorial rooms.
Why would you do that? You're giving up, you're throwing away your bias, right? And even within those numbers, I mean, I need more context. Carney has been holding regular news conferences in his role as prime minister about tariffs and all that sort of stuff, which, by the way, I just saw got canceled. But doing that. So how many of those questions involved those additional news conference on those things and et cetera? But I really don't have a lot of time, and I don't think the public does, for journalists complaining about how hard their job is. Everybody has tough days. Everybody has people who get in the way of them doing their job the way they want. So they should fight for the right to get as many questions as they can. But if you go to the public, treat me nice or I'm going to go tell mom, that there's no time. The public has no patience for that at all.
Tara, there's also what's happened in the U.S., right? Like Trump arguably won the last election not engaging with mainstream media at all. He went on Theo Von's podcast. He went on Joe Rogan's podcast. He spoke to journalists. A lot of networks said he wasn't going to win the thing. And then he comes out the other side winning it. Can we learn anything from that in terms of not needing to engage with the mainstream to come out with a trophy in your hand?
Yeah, I'm sure that a number of politicians watched that strategy and did take notes for sure. I will say, though, that since he's been in office, because Trump loves doing media so much, he has made himself quite available to journalists. I'm thinking just about that one particular session where he's in the Oval Office signing executive orders and took like hours of questions, it seemed like. It was probably not hours.
Unlimited follow-ups in the Oval Office, if you're allowed.
So he loves the media in one sense and is available in that sense for sure.
Mm-hmm. Peter, what do you think?
Well, I think that if that proves anything, it proves that just because you take questions from the media doesn't make you a nice guy, or a very stable genius, or whatever phrase it is you want to use. But I mean, to be fair on all this, there is a big shift in media in terms of that. You no longer require, and haven't for many years now, it hasn't really sunk in yet, and the Trump election was maybe one of the signals you'd seen, and maybe the previous Trump election was as well, that you no longer as a politician need to have a good relationship with media, hoping that they will push your message through to the public. And in the way that you want it to. You can now speak directly to the public. You can fire off your YouTube videos. You can fire off your tweets. Your Facebook posts. Whatever you want. You can communicate. This is like the Reformation. You can communicate directly with the person you want to communicate with. You don't have to go through media as an intermediary. And that means that media need to adjust the traditional role that they've had. And they haven't. So we will continue to see this evolve, I think, in the years ahead. But it'll be interesting to watch.
Let's talk about one of the biggest intermediaries, the CBC. We saw another chapter in the CBC story. Mark Carney, leader of the Liberal Party, came out with his plan for the CBC, in which he sought to enlarge the mandate of the public broadcaster. I call this section bloated broadcaster or hungry broadcaster. He said, from Schitt's Creek to Hockey Night in Canada and Mike Myers, these are products of Canada. They're the result of strong representative public broadcasting. He called for a $150 million injection into the broadcaster, what would become almost a doubling of the cash it receives from the federal government, $1.4 billion currently, noting that other broadcasters around the world get far more money per capita. And Peter, I want your immediate reaction to this, because unlike the previous Heritage Minister's plan, he said that CBC should continue to collect advertising and subscription revenue. You wrote about this for us, Peter, this week. What did you think when you heard those words come out of Carney's lips last week?
I think it was a very political statement. Either that, or he actually doesn't understand how the media ecosystem works at all. I think it would be disastrous to allow CBC to continue to sell advertising while doubling its funding and potentially its size. In terms of that, it would literally crush the private sector media out of existence, unless the intent is to continue to increase subsidies for them, in which case everybody becomes what the CBC currently is, which is a publicly funded commercial news and entertainment corporation. I think it was very foolish and showed that a Carney government would be very much on the same disastrous digital policy road that the Trudeau government was on, and I was very disappointed to see that.
Tara, currently the CBC, its public funding per capita is around $33.66. That's per Canadian. Nearly half the average funding of G7 countries, which is $62.20 per capita. What do you think of Carney's plan? That's what he was reacting to, how we compare to Europeans and other countries. What did you make of his proposal to give the CBC more cash?
Oh gosh, I just think the optics of this are terrible. I mean, you already have a number of people in the public weighing in daily on the election coverage and feeling that it is too biased in favor of the Liberals. And then you have the Liberals come out and say, we're going to give you more money during an election
without changing anything. That's what I was struck by most. It's like attached to these changes because we feel like the current CBC needs to reform, but none of that.
Yeah, I think it's terrible optics. And in general, as you guys know, I support a fully funded CBC. I don't think it's wise to give the CBC more cash right now. The CBC is in crisis and it needs to deal with its issues. And I don't think there's any incentive to deal with the many problems that it has if it gets a huge infusion of cash while it's failing.
Mm-hmm. Of course, the other side of this is Pierre Poilievre's plan. I was on the phone with someone close to the campaign last week. I said, has anything changed, in this Trumpish era and Canadians waving flags? There's this idea that we've talked about that they're going to wrap their arms around cultural institutions like the CBC and seek to save them. Their plan is not changing. Poilievre still aims to axe the English arm of the CBC. He's mentioning this stuff less at rallies, but they assured me it's still going to be part of his election platform to be released in coming days. Apparently, Paul Wells reports that there were advisors who urged him to move more slowly with his plans to downsize the CBC, and they were removed from his inner circle. He told them, I'm not Aaron O'Toole, and if that's the kind of advice you're going to give me, it's your last. Do you think Peter Poilievre should change his plans? Are you surprised to hear that it's sort of steady as she goes?
No, I mean, to the extent that I'm not an insider on any of that, but I thought that I thought it was kind of a false narrative to begin with, and likely politically motivated, because they have a plan and it will fail or it will succeed. And you do not succeed generally by abandoning a plan quickly and panicking. Mm-hmm. And there are lots of players that get involved in this conversation who have their own personal axes to grind against other people, and in some cases they're simply trying to promote their own profile so that after the election they will make more money.
Tara and I were actually at a panel talking about the future of the CBC, called The Future of the CBC, Public Broadcasting in a Polarized Era, at a democracy conference held at Toronto Metropolitan University this past weekend. Tara, what did you think of that conference? What was the vibe you got there? What kind of message were you hoping to bring to that? And do you think you got it out?
It was interesting, and I was very glad to be invited. I do really appreciate that the conference sought to have alternative perspectives on this, and I really like it when there's a diversity of viewpoint on a panel. So I appreciated that a lot. I think you and I both made an effort to put forward some of the arguments on the conservative side of things, which I think was rounding out the conversation. And I do think that it was well received. I thought that the audience was very receptive. I will point out, I thought it was interesting, like the big question in that audience was, is there evidence to support the claim that social justice stories are over-indexed on the CBC, or is that just confirmation bias on the part of critics? And I just do think it's interesting because I do speak to conservative audiences and I speak to more liberal-leaning audiences now as well. And the questions are very different across the spectrum. And so I think we did our best to sort of unpack that and to put forward the perspective of those who really do feel that there is bias, but also some of the evidence that exists that there is bias as well. What did you make of that part of it?
I got the sense sometimes they thought we were like gaslighting them. The phrase, yeah, how can you be sure there's so much social justice programming on the CBC? And my response to that is, and again, you hear this from the left, I'm like, turn on the radio, turn on the TV. It's clearly like a large slice of the coverage pie. The message I wanted to bring is that, you don't have to want to destroy the CBC for it to change. There's a ton of momentum that's built up. The criticism has been aired by people on the left and right. And if Carney's plan goes through, you're just sending more money to the CBC. I'm not sure what's being learned here. Like, that momentum is lost. It's steady as she goes. No one's sort of punished. There's no sort of informed decisions being made here. And everyone that's frustrated and doesn't feel reflected by the public broadcaster is just supposed to keep nodding their heads? Like, we've talked about this before. There needs to be some internal signs that these criticisms have been heard and they're trying to correct them or tweak them. Peter, what do you feel like this moment is as it relates to the CBC? You've got one side offering them a bunch of money, no strings attached, another side wanting to cut the entire English arm of the broadcaster off. Where do you think the sort of, I don't know, how does the CBC handle this? When they're trying to report a campaign, where clearly there's two offers on offer for the CBC. One is clearly more, better than the other for the actual broadcaster that then has to tell Canadians how the campaign's going on.
Yeah, I mean, I'll give credit to Brodie Fenlon, the news editor-in-chief of CBC, when they issued a statement when they were asked for comment on Carney's position, in which they were basically, they said, you're not going to get one from us. And Fenlon was quite clear that this represents a huge conflict of interest for the CBC trying to cover this issue in an election. And I admire him for his honesty. I think that was really good. I wish others receiving government money would be as transparent as they were. And that's really all you can do, is be honest about the conflict this represents. The issue, I think, that is really that is troubling regarding further troubling regarding Carney's position in the CBC is that there's no sense of that reality, that you have a certain percentage of the population that loves you and feels that their issues are being advanced and forwarded, and the people who are opposed to them are being diminished, rightfully in their view. And then you have, a quarter of the people roughly who basically just want it to die. And they resent the fact that their money is being taken for them, and in return they get abused and mistreated at worst and at best ignored. And I think that's the issue that they just don't seem to quite get. Like, it's one thing to have a weak portion of your audience. It's another for them to want to kill you. And that's a serious issue that should be.
I told them that,
Peter,
Peter,
but they seem to be doing it.
I was on a subway ride home, and I overheard a prominent CBC host, I won't say his name, talking to a colleague saying that they can no longer do interviews in your city in Calgary with a CBC like mic flash with the insignia on it, because people will like not just walk past them, they'll yell at them, scoff at them, etc. Like that's this, and then those reporters are left to cover like Western alienation and issues as it relates to Albertans potentially wanting to leave the country. Like, how the heck do you sort through that? There obviously has to be some bridging being done.
Yeah, CBC television, local television news in Calgary. Last I checked, I hate to throw out numbers because then you'll have to fact check them all day tomorrow, but they carry on. There's a lot of good people at CBC Radio, I might add. There's a lot of good reporters, and they do a lot of online stuff. But head in the sand. If the Liberals win the election, hey, it's all good. They just move forward, and you get a new mandate, and you start funding more Indigenous product and more BIPOC product, and you start hiving it off, and more climate action stories, and away you go. And it's like this brief nightmare of a potential Conservative government just goes away.
Mm-hmm. Lost in the sands of time. Okay, let's move on to our final block here. Fertility Follies is what I'm calling it. Poilievre was out east a few days ago, and he got a raft of criticism and a raft of people saying, like, I don't know what the heck is the issue here. With a comment he made, he says, he's talking about home ownership mostly. We will not forget that young 36-year-old couple whose biological clock is running out faster than they can afford to buy a home and have kids. Cue a bunch of different coverage from various media outlets saying this is a horrible thing. National Observer says remarks are sort of incel adjacent, tying it to the MAGA pro-natalist movement, which I learned about it just a few days ago, linkages to talk of abortion, etc. Tara, we're two men who probably shouldn't be talking about this too much. I'm going to give the floor to you to give us a sense of what you thought about the comments and then the coverage that came out of them.
Yes. So first of all, please feel free to discuss it. Men have fertility issues as well as women. I think couples. We should all be discussing this.
Do I have a biological clock, Tara? I don't know.
As someone who does have a biological clock, let me tell you, this controversy was fascinating to me, and I'd like to tell you a little bit about why. So, first of all, I think we should recognize that this was a kind of mini moral panic that was ginned up by politicians. You saw liberal politicians commenting on this, and you saw Jagmeet Singh come out and comment on this and say, I don't think any woman in Canada wants Pierre Poilievre talking about their biological clock. So I am a woman in Canada. I do want Pierre Poilievre talking about my biological clock.
Wow, I'm clipping that.
I'm in my 40s. I'm in my 40s. All of my friends are in their 30s or 40s. I can tell you that every single one of us has dealt with this or is dealing with this. The housing crisis, as Mr. Poilievre was very right to highlight, is a big part of this problem. But so, too, is the fact that this problem is kind of a third rail in Canadian politics and just doesn't get talked about at all. And so what was interesting about the coverage is, as you highlight, there was this kind of outcry. I do think it was ginned up by politicians, but it was picked up by the media. And you saw a bunch of opinion articles coming out and sort of piling on to that. I want to just highlight one in particular. I made notes because the logic here is quite hard to follow. This is from Jen St. Dennis at the Tyee. So this is basically making the point she does not want Pierre Poilievre talking about fertility issues. And here's the context that she's adding. So for decades, far-right ideas have been more mainstream. Then you go to, they're promoted by men, young men, and their audience on podcasts. Next thought, Pierre Poilievre has been on one of these podcasts, Jordan Peterson's podcast. Next thought, Peterson has promoted heterosexual marriage as a cure to things that are ailing young men. Pierre Poilievre told Peterson young men want families. Then a religious anti-abortion ad played during the show. Next thought, Abortion is legal in Canada, but not the US. Right wingers oppose abortion. Elon Musk is in favor of pronatalism. JD Vance has also alluded to that. Critics say pronatalism is associated with eugenics.
Oh my gosh, that's
closing thought. Pierre Poilievre is polling terribly with women. There you go. That's the sort of, how does that inform the public at all? I really don't understand. And then I wanted to highlight that because that's the level of the discourse around this issue when we do actually really need to be talking about it. And part of the reason we need to be talking about it is there is research in this country to show that women are not having as many children as they would like. So this is a legitimate issue. It should be a election issue. And there's no problem in my book with Pierre Poilievre talking about this, or Mark Carney talking about it, or Jagmeet Singh talking about it. Please have at it. I will say, just to tack on to the end of this, there was one piece that was quite balanced here, and it was by CBC News. So kudos to them. They went through, they talked about the issues, they gave the StatsCan data to back up that this is an issue worth talking about. And they talked about the Cardis research, and they had both the critics on the moral outrage sides and some of the defenders talking, women talking about this being an issue, and we'd like to see it discussed. So it was a very balanced piece. So kudos CBC on that.
I'm just imagining like a fertility election, like you said. Imagine we had a free trade election, then weirdly in 2025 fertility election. There are stats there. You mentioned them. We tried to bring up some of them in the Hub. A piece John Ibbotson, most recently from the Globe, wrote for us talking about how this should be a mainstream issue, not necessarily talked about in conservative circles. Canada now belongs to the lowest low as it relates to fertility in countries, with a total fertility rate of 1.26. That's the number of children women will have on average in their lifetime. A median age for a woman having a kid in Canada is 30 compared to 27 in the US. Recent study in Brazil that linked obtaining housing, increasing both the likelihood that young people would have children and the number of children they would have. Anyway, that's the stats behind it. At the same time, you mentioned like Poilievre does have a problem with women. I guess some people have a problem with not so much what he said, but the person saying it. Angus Reid has him at just 27% of women respondents aged 18 to 34 supporting him. That's less than 50% who say they're going for the Liberals. Peter, what did you think of all this? Were you offended? What did you make of the media coverage that came out of it?
I think I would agree with Tara that it was ginned up by politicians. I think we should be able to discuss things in a mature manner. And I think to the extent that we as a society or we as a species are able to reproduce, it's kind of a fundamental issue, because if we don't, we cease to exist, right? So
we need Canadians to populate a better Canada.
In very other ways. All that said, April the 10th is my birthday. I will be turning 70 years old, and one of the reasons I have lived this long is because I have refrained for the most part in commenting on women's reproductive activities.
Well, we're so glad that your parents, I assume, were able to get a house and then have you, Peter, because it means you're here today.
And I was able to get a house and have children too.
One of the things that came up, and again, I won't talk about the personal side of this, but one of the criticisms was this is a deeply intimate and personal decision, topic, etc. One of the reasons why women were uncomfortable about Poilievre talking about this. Tara, what did you make of that criticism?
You could say that is a very deeply personal thing, but I will get personal for a moment here. Like, I missed the boat on having kids. I am in my 40s. I wanted kids, and I didn't get there before the biological clock ran out. So that is also a deeply personal experience. And if we don't talk about the range of stories in public, we are not aware of the breadth of this issue and the personal pain that is associated with this issue. A fundamental part of life and the Canadian dream is being able to have a family for many, many people. Not all people, but for many people. We have to be able to speak about that openly.
Mm-hmm. Do you hear that? I've heard my friends. Listen. I'm in my. What am I? 33 years old, and
How old are you,
I was Listen, full disclosure for me too. I'm having a kid. I'm gonna have a kid in September. I was very fortunate and lucky to have this happen. I have lots of friends who are struggling for fertility treatment, and it's not happening for them. I feel blessed. I feel blessed that I'm able to have a house. One of the reasons we're having a kid is because we're able to have a house. My wife is 35 and a little bit older than me, so the word biological clocks is something that's come up in many conversations between myself and her. Yeah, I don't know. I'll just put it out to the group if it's a phrase you guys have heard when you're talking to people. I'm a millennial. It's something I've heard. Is it used in the boomer, dimly lit, smoke-filled chambers, Peter? At the clubs
I have
you
a very
frequent?
dim view of boomers, so don't get me started on that. But I have children of my own. I have nieces, nephews. These are issues that have been discussed. My youngest nephew and his girlfriend are in Vancouver. I believe I can't speak for him, but for his generation, he has told me that a great many people are thinking they either if they want to have a family and a house, they're going to have to move out of Vancouver. And they would like to have a house and a family. So maybe they have to move to Calgary. Maybe they have to move to Edmonton. This is an issue. And what is tiresome and really kind of wears a guy down after a while is when you have perfectly serious issues, like Tara has explained and you've explained. These are very heartfelt issues for most people. And at the end of the day, the only thing that really matters of having people close to you and having families and that sort of stuff when you go through all these sort of things. And when media get complicit in juicing these things up into being confrontational, that if you choose to speak of these things, you are a bad person. Mm-hmm. And if you choose to speak of these things, you will lose the election. And some women find this objectionable. Well, of course, some women find it objectionable. Everybody finds something objectionable. But there were also a number of women who didn't find it objectionable, right? So we don't get those, like the old saying, newspapers don't never report when airplanes land safely, sort of thing. But it's from the boomer perspective, if you want, I'm just sick and tired of people making everything adversarial and not being able to have a grown-up conversation about things without pointing fingers.
I would agree with that 100%. And I would also say I've spoken to a number of Gen X women about this on the air and off. And our generation, we feel like we were done a bit of a disservice in that these conversations didn't happen out in the open. There was just this sense that you had limitless time and that you could start planning your family at 37 or 39, or, even in my very early 40s, people were still saying to me, well, you're going to have children. And I just think there's a real lack of understanding about how women's biology works. And no wonder there is, because anytime anyone talks about this in public, this is what happens. It does not do a service to the next generation of young women and men who are trying to plan their families to not acknowledge that there's certain limits to female biology here.
Mm-hmm. And the stakes are high, right? Like, it's just, it decides the rest of your life, whether you're procreating or not. So we've got the millennial, Gen X, and boomer perspective here. And I think it's important, like Peter said, I don't know, if you're a journalist or someone else, to keep things within the realm of, yes, I disagree with you, you're wrong. But in doing so, you being wrong doesn't make you a bad person or a bigot or something like that you're like morally reprehensible. It was one of the things Tara and I were trying to get across in the panel last week, that you shouldn't sort of be preaching from on high. Another thing too is, like, we've talked about it before, language. Like, we should be using in our journalism language that we hear on the streets in Canada. I don't know. I hear biological clock. So I don't know. I think it's a phrase that's used by most people. So I don't think it's that crazy to hear. That's besides who's the one saying it. Let's end on this. Peter, you have a bouquet to deliver this week. It's again, we criticize the CBC and then we praise it. I think the bouquet is going to someone from the CBC, if I'm not mistaken. The headline of the piece is Carney's former firm Brookfield has been accused of breaching Indigenous rights in 4 countries. Who's this bouquet going to and why?
CBC Indigenous, and to the point of giving bouquets, criticism has no value unless you're willing to praise the same individuals and organizations. So it's not about the organization or the individuals, it's about the work that gets produced. So CBC Indigenous did what CBC Indigenous should be doing. It looked into a matter to see whether a person auditioning for the role of Prime Minister has treated Indigenous people well. So it pursued that story, and hats off to them. They did their job. They served the audience they're designed to serve, and they brought forward an issue that was worthy of consideration.
So that bouquet
and
goes
the rest
to
of Canada too. I would like to know how certain candidates treat Indigenous people in this country. I would like to know that across the board. So I think it serves everybody for sure.
Yeah, they should be, investigating both leaders and giving us a sense of what their previous relations with Indigenous folks have. I know they've gone after Pierre Poilievre for comments he made about payments coming out of residential schools. So, they're giving it to the Liberal leader as well. We encourage balance. This bouquet goes out to Brett Forrester at CBC, who Tara and I have actually met, I think, a few months ago at Carleton. So congratulations, Brett. I think.
Yep. Kudos, Brett.
In order. Thank you very much, guys, for joining us this week. It's been a pleasure. I think the next time we join you, it'll be the end of the campaign. So we'll have a winner to declare there in this trade war, Trumpish campaign that has sort of lapped up on our Canadian shores. So we'll look forward to that. And thank you for joining us this week. And we'll see you again 2 Thursdays from now. Thanks so much, guys. I appreciate it.